Hello, friends. Welcome back to Reiki Crossroads and Connections, an ongoing series of conversations where we explore ways of being that help us to live rooted, spacious, connected lives and that help us to remember ourselves. And we're doing that through conversations with a Reiki teacher and with folks who are occupying a wide range of magical, creative, beautiful, healing spaces in the work that they do in the world. Oftentimes, finding beautiful and synchronous points of connection between these forms of expression in our lives and in our work. These are the kinds of conversations that light me up, that I love to have with people, finding out how people do what lights them up in ways that are authentic and unique to them, to the traditions that they follow, and that also have these points of connections with the traditions that I follow. My name is Michaela of Heartscapes Reiki, and I'm really glad to have you here for today's conversation. And that conversation gets to be with a really valued colleague of mine, Christian Stone of Standing Stones Healing. Welcome, Christian.
Thank you, Michaela. I'm so honored to be here. It's such an honor, and it's wonderful to have you as a colleague. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, one of the joys and challenges of doing work that is from our heart, right? Like we have this passion and then we make it our work, and we're usually doing that alone. We're usually doing that, kind of as a beacon for whatever it is that has been lighting us up in our life, and that can be fraught with the experience of solitude or of feeling like we have to do it alone, or it can be absolutely enmeshed in community and connection when we kind of hold that beacon to connect with other people. And you are a person who really is a beacon, a light in various communities for connection, for gathering, and for circling around these, ways of being that are our passion. And I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but you just released a podcast this week about the importance of community as Reiki practitioners and practitioners of other magical and healing arts. That resonated very deeply. So I would love to touch on some of the themes in there. But first, I'd love to officially introduce you to our listeners and our viewers by just sharing a little bit of the on the page bio of Christian Standing Stone. And then we'll get into more of, who you really are off the page. But on the page, Christian of Standing Stones Healing has been practicing Reiki since 2014. You've been reading cards and coaching since 2012. And you specialize in life changes and transitions, which includes helping other Reiki practitioners to transition into their Reiki businesses. You host the Build Your Reiki Business podcast. You teach Unlock Your Card Magic program, and you're the author of several books, including Throwing Stones, a Rune Reading Guide. And so just, on the page, we can see that you're holding many different spaces, many different areas of creativity that people can step into and really be in this question of change and transition, and what does that mean? And as a nature lover, as a cat lover, as a gardener, you are well versed in the ways in which the world continues to cycle and to change. And I would imagine that has helped you to understand transition in some really helpful ways. So thank you for bringing that wisdom here.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Absolutely. And I love to just start by kind of getting the temperature in the room, if you will, and just asking how you're doing and just sharing a bit of how we both are on this fine late fall day. So how are you doing, Christian?
Thank you so much for asking. I'm doing well. The temperature is chilly outside. We've got a stiff breeze and some snow flurries. And it is a typical November day. And, inside it's nice and warm and cozy. And I am so excited to connect with you again and to have a nice chat. It's always a great conversation. So thank you. Yes. And how are you, Michaela?
I am doing pretty well. I'm in a little bit of like holiday manic phase, like a little bit of like, oh, I've put off some projects and now there's certain cultural deadlines coming up in the very near future that I'm feeling a little bit of pressure around. This often happens to me. I'm a very creative person. I like to craft and to make things, and I love to, I love a handcrafted gift, but my like energy and motivation and inspiration around that is widely variable. And so like I have to feel that like flurry. I love you used the word flurry a moment ago, of like inspiration. Even if I've been working on this idea for months, like I see it, like I know what I want to make, but like the energy and the motivation to like go through all the steps to get there, it just hasn't manifested yet. And I just keep waiting for it. And I'm like, am I going to have to just push? And like I just know that that doesn't work for me to be like, well, I'm going to do it anyway, which is why I had to give up on being a professional artist like way early on in my job life, because I just can't make it happen if it's not there. I have so much respect for people who can like generate the creative fire like as according to a schedule. So I'm feeling a little pressure from that. And on the other hand, the weather is really beautiful here. I've been spending a lot of time in the garden and, just feeling pretty good outside of that. So there's a bit of a tension there between those two ways of being. Yeah. So with that, and reminding myself that tension is a source of energy, right? Anytime there's tension, anytime we stretch something, right, we generate the possibility of more energy. And so I'd love to kind of bring that energy into this conversation and really begin with, we saw the landscape of your current professional persona on the page, but we know that what's on the page is really the surface level of how we got to where we are, why we do what we do, why it matters to us. And so I'd love to ask you to share a little bit, just one or two threads that you followed in your life that's helping to weave this tapestry of the work that you do in the world. Just whatever feels at the surface, if you look back into that trajectory from some time in the past to right now in this moment. What are some of the threads that you followed to get here?
Yeah, great, Michaela. Thanks. I love this food for thought, for conversation. I first want to say, though, that I am one of those people that I can, if I got a thought, an idea, and it's like, oh, I don't know that I feel motivated. Well, I go with it as soon as I feel it and
Love
start
it.
moving forward, and know that at some point the interest is going to wane. But if I just keep moving forward on it step by step, eventually it'll get done. I don't know about you, Michaela, but there are plenty of projects that I've started. And then in the middle, you're kind of like, yeah, I'm not really so into this anymore. And I think that that middle is just so normal and so to be expected when it comes to creativity, and that we all have that dip when we get to the middle, and wondering if it's something that we really want to continue with. And so for me, I've found in my own experience that I have really many times pushed myself to keep moving forward. And I've been really glad that I have, because I don't know about you. Well, I'm sure that you do have lots of unfinished projects, just like I sure do in my own life. And I'm excited that I can give myself a kick in the butt to get moving on them.
So much.
So, that indeed is a thread throughout my life for sure. This idea of having creative impulses and moving on them and continuing them and keep moving with them. And I will say, even Michaela, sometimes when it doesn't seem like it makes sense to, and knowing when it is time to put them down, rather than to keep moving forward with them. If it's not fulfilling you, and if you're not feeling it, then what's the sense of doing it? When I was a kid, I was about 12 years old, and my grandmother asked me to go to the corner store and buy some lunch meat. And I walked up to the corner store, and there was a guy coming out. I had gone in, and he was saying to the clerk, I had just bought a lottery ticket. And he said, I'll be back tomorrow to pick up my money. And the clerk laughed and said, "Oh, sure you will." And he stopped in the doorway and he said, "Yes, I will. What's the sense of doing something if you don't believe in it?" And he looked at me and he said, "Right, buddy?" And I was just, just kind of awestruck at what he just said, because I realized in that moment that it really was one of those life truths. And so truly, what's the sense of doing something if we don't believe in it? And so I think that those are wise words for sure. I don't know if he really did ever win the lottery. The chances are pretty low, but he believed in it. um,
Oh,
yeah, yeah. And so, Michaela, I think that creative impulse for sure is one of the threads of my life. As a kid, I was always writing songs and making up songs. I wrote a rap song when I was really little about ghosts.
love it.
And I was always inventing inventions. And so that creative impulse is really one of the threads that has been with me, from the songs and the inventions and photography and poetry and
Mm.
just all kinds of things. And, now, of course, in my business, creating programs, offering programs. And so it's just such an exciting way to express myself creatively. I don't know, Michaela, how you feel about it in terms of creating programs and classes. I feel that there's a real element of creativity there. What are your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, it was a real breakthrough for me when I really clued that in because, again, back to tension, I've often felt this tension between my like early, from childhood through like my 20s, where I really intended to be in the creative arts. Like that was always my intention. And part of that was because that was the only thing I really loved. And it was the only thing I felt that I was good at. I have a lot of like early school like stuff around feeling not good at anything. Um, and so it almost felt like, well, the only thing I can do is in the creative arts. But then running into this roadblock of my energy cycle, which is I have that dip on the front end that you talked about, right? My dip is not in the middle, it's at the front. There might be a long valley before I get started. And then it's about 3/4 of the way through. It's at like 80, 75, 80%. And just like, ah, so it's like it's the near complete release of the energy. And so when I realized that I wasn't going to be able to make it as an artist if I can't just like complete a project in a timely fashion, like it's just not going to happen. There was a real grief there. And when I moved into ultimately like program design, firstly in university around leadership work, but then in my work with Heartscapes around Reiki and around soul collage and other related subjects, realizing that there's a tremendous amount of creative energy that goes into designing a space, designing an experience arc, figuring just the right ingredients, just the right pieces that should come into that arc for this particular um, context, right? These particular folk, and then being able to be flexible inside of that, right? To be responsive, to shift and pivot and change in reaction or in response and collaboration with the people who have gathered and the circumstances that come up. Yeah, huge amount of creative energy in that. And it really sustains me. It really, helps with that grief of like letting go of that. I'm going to be an artist and also like staying engaged and interested in my business. So yeah, that's a great question. I love that.
Wonderful. And then for me, another thread throughout my life has certainly been one of change and transition. That's been a thread in my life. And I think I realized that when I looked back on my life experiences and when I looked back on my professional life and the people who I was helping, and helping them through their life transitions. In the past, I served as a career coach. That was a full-time profession that I had for quite a few years, and realizing that I was helping people not just in terms of the career stuff, but it was really all about life change and transition. And I really felt drawn to be helping people during those life changes and transitions. And I really learned a lot about the kinds of things that we experience during change and transition that I have found are really common across all kinds of changes and transitions. And I will say that, you know, having that knowledge, the secrets to change and transition, if you will, have really helped me in my own transitions to know that there are going to be ups and downs with the feelings, to know that it's going to be a challenge, to know that the routine is going to change, and that if we know that, we can take charge and help guide that. So, change and transition has really been a theme of my own life as well, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't realize that you were a career coach. I know you did some coaching in various business spaces, but specifically around careers, and that was a little bit of a piece of my journey in the university, doing some career coaching with students. And yeah, similar reflection, that there's nuts and bolts like skills around writing a resume and doing an interview. Super important, right? But how one navigates those feelings of I'm moving from one state that had its own challenges and changes, but then came to be consistent. In my case, student, right? I was a student, and now I'm getting ready to transition into my work life. And there's so much pressure around that, like endless lists of pressure around that particular transition. And, this act, like this ritual of applying for jobs and going through that practice, um, it's like it is part of the ritual of that liminal space. And this is part of what I'm hearing and what you're sharing, and the way that it kind of showed up for me is in understanding and kind of working with this idea of liminal space, and this idea that in any change, any transition, even if it's getting up in the morning, right, transitioning from sleep to wake and going about your day, there is a space in between when you're no longer asleep, but you're not yet fully awake and dressed and ready to go, and you're something else. You're in the in between. You're in the liminal space, and you're in this valley, right? That is going to take as long as it's going to take. And one of the things that started to become clear when I was working with students, and that has become much more clear as I've like focused on that dynamic and, perhaps a similar way that you have, is that our culture is heavily resistant to liminal space, right? We barely acknowledge that it's there. Right? And we want to speed through it as quickly as we can. We just want to be the new thing. We want to be on the other side, right? We want to be grown. We want to be married. We want to be established. We want to be, in our retirement age. We want to be, the empty nester. We want to be the person who knows the skill, who can do the thing. We really don't have a lot of support in like loving that liminal, juicy, not yet space that is essential in any kind of change. And I'm just wondering how or if that idea has shown up for you, and either in your own changes or as you're working with folks, and what you might, yeah, just what you might reflect on that aspect of change.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, it's true that liminality is a real point of discomfort for us, and that we do have a hard time sitting in that space. And part of the reason is the ambiguity of it. We're neither here nor there. We are in transit. And I think it's so true, oftentimes really want to speed that up and let's get to where we're going and get there faster. Um, and I think for me, in my own life, with all of the changes and transitions that I've had, one of the most challenging life transitions I've gone through was back in 2011. I had been living in a home that I dearly loved. It was a mansion built in 1800. And
Wow.
I was the caretaker of the mansion. So I got to live there for free in this beautiful mansion. And it was actually, Michaela, an old ladies social club. So I was the caretaker of the old ladies social club. They would come over and have their tea, and then I would clean up after them. And in exchange for all of that, I lived in the basement of the house and took care of it. And the house, then the old ladies decided to sell the house, and it was sold to a new owner who I was teaching part time at that time, and he wanted me to pay rent, and on my part time teaching salary, I couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
And so I could have made it work, but it would not have felt positive. And so I started looking for a new home, and I only had a short amount of time. I had 1 month to move out. And my parents said, "Well, you can come live with us." It was like, I don't have to. I've saved up enough money that I have enough money for rent for the first several months until I can find a new job. But I hadn't been living near my parents for years. And, I thought, well, maybe it might be nice to spend some time with them and hang out with them and live with them just for a little bit. And so I did move in with my parents. And then it was, the moment of afterwards, like, oh my God, what did I just do? And
Yeah.
so that was a really hard transition because I left this home I loved, a whole life I loved. I enjoyed my job. Um, I left the whole state and moved to a whole new state. And so that was a really challenging transition for me. It was not easy to uproot myself completely from a life that I really loved and to move in with my parents who I also very much love. And living with your parents is a little different from going to visit them.
Yeah, yeah. And what did you find was helpful for you in
Mm.
navigating that liminal space? And, you know, and as an extension of that, you offer now through your business a variety of practices. And I want to circle back in a minute to the way that those practices form ritual. But I'm curious if any of those practices were alive for you in that time, or what else helped you with that transition.
Yeah, absolutely, Michaela. So this is actually when I started reading cards. So I was down in my parents' basement and I found my sister's old Celtic Dragon tarot deck. And she hadn't used it in years, hadn't touched it, and had no interest in it. And so I asked her if I could have it, and of course she didn't care. And so I started reading cards in late 2011 as really a way to help me reconnect with myself and to help me navigate that transition, to really not so much seek answers in the cards as to just really have a practice that could help me to really process my grief and work through some of that as well. So yes, I did start reading cards because of that transition, and it was very helpful for me in moving through that experience and processing it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, Yeah, I mean, so often, right, these moments of liminality, they become choice points, right? They become this open door where we have a choice. We can either try to push through it, get to the other side, maybe ignore that it's happening, life as usual, while in the midst of some form of turmoil. Or we can kind of open ourselves to some structure that can help hold us in this new space. And it sounds like, in your case, that cards became part of that structure, gave you some sort of format to focus your attention and to ask questions and be in dialogue with probably yourself as well as the universe. So many of these practices, like astrology, like tarot reading, other forms of oracle card reading, um, and then very explicitly in the soul collage card form that I practice, there's this really what we're up to is being in self-reflective dialogue with our internal spaces and in the ways in which our internal spaces are in collaboration with the world. And cards and like found images and things where there's an element of chance, there's an element of the unexpected, the surprise, the mystery. They're so powerful for opening up that point of self-reflection, right? Because we're seeking meaning in everything all the time, right? So whether or not it's actually there, right, it can be these breadcrumbs that our minds follow. And so it makes a total sense that card reading would come to you in that particular space in that time. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's of course been a nourishing practice since then, in which I pull cards for myself at particular intervals, New Year's, my birthday, and full moons. And I
Yeah.
really don't pull cards for myself other than that too frequently. But those are talking about ritual. Those are ritualistic experiences for me and part of my own spiritual practice.
Yeah. Yeah. We talk a lot about ritual in this year's space of Heartscapes. As that form of containing the liminal space, that's often the lens that I'm looking at it through. And the ways that humanity for forever has crafted ritual as a way of navigating change and a way of drawing our attention to what matters in a particular moment, um, noticing and conferring significance on a moment, on a situation, on an object, right? And helping that to be the structure, the foundation on which we can experience the mysterious, right? The unknown. Like you mentioned that earlier, that space of the unknown. Um, and I don't know, I mean, I see this in your work, so I'm curious how this resonates for you. But for me, I've really intentionally kind of brought that lens of ritual into my work with teaching Reiki as a way of understanding part of why we would practice in a particular way. I think there's often a mindset of like Reiki or some of these other practices, it's almost this transactional space of like, there's a problem, so I'm going to come in and fix it. There's a question, I'm going to come in and answer it. There's a hurt, I'm going to come in and heal it. And that can be a very valuable way to use these practices. But for me, the purpose of them, right, is to create a landscape of support around the fact that change is always happening. And to do that in the form of rituals that can be bite-sized, right? It can be a 10-minute practice. It can be pulling a card on your birthday. It can be much more involved, like when we hold community spaces that have a much more formalized ritual. But something, this being able to navigate the territory from the spontaneous ritual, right? Oh my God, a need just arose in this moment. It was unexpected. It needs a response, right? Something is asking to be acknowledged and responded to, and we can take 2 minutes to do that or 5 minutes to do that. Happens in my Reiki classes all the time. Something will arise. Oftentimes that person feels like whatever just arose is an interruption and it's a problem, and it's, I should be embarrassed about it because now I'm like taking attention because this thing just came up for me, as opposed to like, this is the material that's here. This is why we're here. Right. And this thing that just arose, this change, this interruption, so-called interruption, is an opportunity for us to pause and to slow down and to put a little bit of space around it. And for us to practice the art of spontaneous ritual, of moving through from something we were to something we will be. And it's been really powerful over the last 2, well, really, I would say that my attention went in this direction during 2020, where everything changed and all this spaciousness opened up and also all of this constriction at the same time. And, having those skills to focus on, to be able to step into ritual to navigate was really, really powerful. So anyway, that that focus of being able to, as a skill set, right, to be able to craft spontaneous ritual in a moment. And also, as you were saying around program design, that includes crafting more focused, intentional, maybe more elaborate rituals. And so I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about how that shows up in your work. I know you have held rituals for the communities that you hold. I've been able to be a part of some of those. But yeah, I just would love to know a little bit more about how ritual shows up for you.
Yeah, thank you. I am a firm believer in the power of ritual. As a matter of fact, it's one of the 7 practices of my 7-way path. Eventually, that book will be published. I wrote it years ago, and I haven't gotten around to polishing it up for publication. But eventually, you'll be able to read the book.
Amazing.
um, yeah, but we know from research how powerful ritual is. And so, we know, yes, as you mentioned, that humans have been conducting rituals for as long as there have been humans. And there is real power in ritual and real ancient wisdom in ritual. And we now have the science to back that up, to know that ritual changes the brain and has a profound impact on the brain. And so anytime we want to create change in our lives or to mark change, transitions or whatever it might be that we want to mark in our lives, a ritual is a very powerful way to do that. And, like you mentioned, a ritual doesn't have to be a big elaborate thing. It can be something that we do in the moment that is as brief as lighting a candle or taking a breath or anything like that. And so ritual doesn't have to be, the wedding or the funeral that comes to mind when we think of ritual. It can be
Right.
something very small and still very powerful.
Yeah.
And so in my own work, in addition to the 7-way path and all of the research that I've done on ritual and the rituals that I conduct in my own lives, in my own life, I've seen it in the lives of clients as well. When you create a ritual space, I think that it really um, fosters healing and growth. And it's a sacred space that we can create in order to facilitate the healing and the growth, and as a space of mindfulness, and as a space to pause and really even just sit in that liminality, and to even almost in a sense celebrate that liminality as well.
Yeah.
And so when we honor those ritualistic spaces, I think that we really give ourselves space to be seen and to be heard and to experience greater and deeper levels of growth and healing.
Yeah. I'm curious how that mindset has been received in the various spaces that you operate in. And I know that those spaces have varied quite a bit over time. I know you've operated in corporate spaces and in university spaces and in, community spaces and in healing spaces. I'm just curious what the reception has been to that mindset around ritual just in your journey.
Yeah, I've gotten lots of questions over the years about a ritual. A ritual, Christian, you say to do a ritual, but I don't even know what that is. What do you mean? And so I've had to do a lot of explaining about, whatever you want it to be, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And to really, break it down. And I think when I get those questions, sometimes it surprises me, like, oh yeah, not everybody is familiar with the idea of ritual. And it really is a gift when people ask me those kinds of questions, because it forces me to pause and reflect and to bring that idea, maybe into a more basic, more grounded kind of an explanation, to
Yeah.
just go with the very small basics of what a ritual is, what it means, and what it can be.
Yeah.
And what's really important is what it means to the person who is doing the ritual, and that it resonates with them and feels right to them. And so I can say, oh, go do a releasing ritual, go burn some things.
Mhm.
But if someone doesn't really feel that called to do that and it doesn't resonate with them, then it's not going to have the same kind of impact.
Yeah.
And so, when it comes to this idea of ritual and how it's received, I think that when I found that people are just like, okay, wait, what do you mean do a ritual? That this is proof that our culture, our dominant Western culture, just does a poor job of ritual, just completely poor.
You're so right about that. And it's actually a point of a lot of like pain for me. And I think for many of us, whether or not we're aware of it, because it is this, for lack of a better term, it's this ally that humanity has had for much of our existence that we just don't understand well. We have the big rituals, right? The weddings, the funerals, the birthdays, the graduations, certain sorts of parties, right? And that tends to be where it ends, at least consciously. And so when one of the reasons I asked you that question is that in the various spaces I've moved through, there's been times when there's been a lot of resistance to that idea. And the resistance has taken a few different forms. One, either rituals are pointless and stupid, and that usually comes from having been subjected to some form of like ongoing like religious ritual in their childhood or young adulthood that they weren't given a lot of context around. There's ways in which like spiritual and religious structures can become stale, right? They can become rote. It can become, you do this over and over again. Why do we do it? Who knows? You just do it. And that's the ritual, and then it has some purpose that I may or may not believe in or feel connected to. But there's this stagnancy about that like it has to be done the same way every time. I don't necessarily feel connection to the outcomes or the purpose of it. And so, it feels a little bit worthless, right? That's something that has been reflected back. On the other side of that is the idea that ritual is connected with, dark forces or weird things or like stuff that doesn't have anything to do with me. That's what those people do, right? Like there's this othering that can happen using that term. And in extreme cases, it can really be like, you are doing the devil's work. I literally had a hit piece written about me because I was invited to facilitate some stuff, which I interpreted as including some ritual in a very Catholic space. And to take responsibility, I didn't understand well what I was walking into. Um, so that's the other side of it, right? Is that like, oh, ritual it means these things that aren't me, right? And so I love that like you talk about bringing it back to a sense of grounding of like, let's talk about what a ritual is and its fundamental purpose, right? And then you make it your own and you let it reflect you, what matters to you, your values, your beliefs, your mindsets, and your intentions, your goals for the ritual. I think that's a really helpful way of talking about it. And, often the languaging that I would use around that is that it's a series of actions that we take that help us to feel grounded, to open up a sense of spaciousness and possibility, to help us feel connected to ourselves, to the world, to each other, and that perhaps help us to remember ourselves. And then, of course, that can look all kinds of ways, right? Depending on what we need. And that's been helpful with navigating this point of either like disidentifying or being suspicious of, or just not seeing the value of it at all. I kind of reflect back to my university experience. I was a student of and then worked for two different universities in my graduate. And in the undergraduate school, at the time that I was there was a very stark divide between like the practicality of like getting the work done. I was working with students around social justice leadership, so there was big doing energy. There was big changing, do the thing, do all the things all the time. There's not enough time, energy there. And then the spiritual spaces of the college, which were very relegated. And it's like never the twain shall meet, right? They were not integrated in the school, in the culture. And when I tried to do that, right, I started to feel this like, wow, there's this other way that I feel like I'm supposed to be contributing here. There just really wasn't a pathway for it. And it made me feel very alienated. On the other side, the school that I went to grad school in, which was the Catholic space that I got in trouble at, in their graduate programs, they're very progressive and very like, you don't have to be Catholic, and Catholic means lots of things. And it was a great place to be. In the undergrad, it was very upper middle class, traditional Catholic. But anyway, in the grad space, there was so much understanding of ritual. It's hard to explain. I was going back through like a lot of my projects and essays and things from that time recently. And it was like they let me write essays on like political organizing by using my soul collage cards to explain what I was talking about, right? Like they let me, use Reiki and create a ritual, like enact the ritual and then write about the ritual as a way of understanding community building, right? It was just like night and day difference between these two institutions. And I have so much respect for that space. And it is because it was a Catholic space, right? They were already rooted on a foundation of ritual as essential and as important, and the spiritual and the mundane and the everyday and the sacred, like being intertwined with each other. And then, there's all kinds of stuff that was not well aligned with me, but at least within the certain spaces there was this understanding of all of those things coming together. And I think, I don't know if this is true for you, but I'm seeing more of that understanding in unexpected places in the last few years, in the last handful of years. There's a little bit more of like, this group of farmers that does a mobile like farmers market. They asked me to come and do a ritual blessing of their truck, when they opened it, and I was like, really, you want you okay, like, let's do it, and it was totally magical. And these farmers were like, okay, I guess this is what we're doing now. It was very foreign to them, but they were open, they were into it, and it was really beautiful. So I don't know if any of that resonates, or if you're seeing more opening up to this awareness that like, oh, there's been something missing, and maybe ritual helps to describe it a little bit. Yeah.
I think so, Michaela. I think that we as humans are often, especially in our dominant Western culture, because of course this is not to the extent that it is in this culture as it is in other cultures. Other cultures do a way better job of ritual.
Sure.
But I think that people are feeling so disconnected and just have such a desire to connect that they recognize that they want to bring more sacredness into their lives, and maybe they don't exactly have the words for it, and so maybe they don't think we need a ritual, let's do a ritual, but they think, how can we maybe bump this up a notch in terms of in terms of the sense about it and the feelings surrounding it. How can we maybe make this a little bit more sacred and raise the level of import a little bit? And so I think that even if the word ritual is a little challenging for some people, or they're like, ritual, what do you mean? That maybe the idea of it as just a way to mark an honor. I often use the term honor when I'm talking about ritual, a way to honor the moment or ourselves or the experience. I think people maybe that might be that might resonate with them a little bit more on a soul level.
Yeah. I think that's so important, to find the language that is going to be meaningful, right? Because I think you're right, ritual can be a really charged word, right? And so, yeah, I love talking about it as honoring. The terminology around holding space has been so valuable. I'm so grateful to Heather Plett, who really did a lot of writing and work around this concept and the practices of holding space, and really kind of popularized in a certain sense that terminology and those understandings. and then recently opened the Center for Holding Space. Um, it's been so valuable to have that language and to have a little bit of a more widespread kind of cultural understanding about what that means, as a way of talking about ritual without using the more loaded terms. So yeah, I love that idea of honoring, as well. And it feels like this thread that we've been following kind of brings us back to the one that was on my mind when we began, which is the idea of community. And your role, at least from my perception, as a community builder, as a person who um, creates pillars of community. And you do that. I mean, the way that I know you is because of your Facebook groups. You've got several that you administrate. They have very different tones. There's the Reiki Business Collective, which is very much about supporting Reiki folk in building our Reiki business, sustaining them, working through the challenges of them, the frustrations, maybe knowing when to shut them down if it's time to close that chapter. Really, really important space there. Then the Reiki Learning Group, which is more of a fluid open space for folks who want to drop in and have conversation about Reiki across a wide range. And then the Encouraging Your Journey group, which I don't know, I'd love for you to describe the intention behind that group. Because that one feels a little magical to me in a way that I don't have words for.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a group where anything goes pretty much, it's really just based on the premise that we all need and want encouragement in our lives. And for me, my life mission is to encourage. I mean, that's it. That's what it's always been. I've always been an encourager. That's a thread, that I didn't realize until later in my life when I look back on all of the rules that I had and the ways in which I showed up in those rules, and realizing that what I was doing all along was I was encouraging. And so encouragement, I feel, is something that we all need. And so that group is there to just be an open space, talking about holding space. That's really what that group is for. It's a much smaller group, a much more private and intimate group. And it's a space where people can come and post any kind of encouragement or any kind of question, any kind of spiritual, any kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So it is a much more open kind of anything goes kind of group for sure.
I love that. And I love the kind of egalitarian like feeling of the spaces that you create. It kind of pushes up a little bit against what I sometimes perceive as a bit of a what am I trying to say? There's a way in which sometimes spiritual communities and practitioners can kind of take on the dominant narrative around individualism and kind of the go it alone, rugged hero individual who rides off into the sunset and like discovers the new things and leads the way. And there's room for that archetype in our lives. Obviously, there's a lot that archetype can get done in our lives. But I don't think it's actually the way we're meant to be as a day to day, right? And I feel like we've kind of taken on this archetype, this icon of the rugged individual, in Western culture, generally in ways that are highly destructive to individuals, to communities, that feeds into things like white supremacy and patriarchy and like all kinds of things that deeply entrench. And in the mindsets of us individual people, where there can be a lot of shame in asking for help, in there can be a lot of resistance to collaboration and the surrender that is required when we collaborate. There can be a lot of we can get a lot of fulfillment out of being seen as the one who can do the thing, right? To the detriment of connection. And that gets duplicated in spiritual communities all the time. And my particular soapbox, my belief is that mindset's actually very counterproductive to the work that we're here to do, because it's not the way that humans actually operate in nature. It's not our natural way of being. It's not who we really are. That there's times when it's absolutely the right choice to do something on our own to leave, to have solitary time, to have pilgrimage, to like do something that's different than the pack because that's what we're meant to do. Like there's absolutely that necessity, but that's not the norm. That's not the way we're meant to live our day to day. And so when I see folks, intentionally speaking up for the need for this community, and by this community, I mean anybody who identifies with doing work that's kind of in the realm of healing, of wellness, of holding space for other people, for change, all of these areas, and saying, hey, we're not meant to do this alone. We're meant to be in community. We're meant to support each other, help each other, ask for help. Make mistakes and be seen in that, right? Be held in that. It really lights me up. And I really heard that in the podcast that you just released this week, which I just listened to yesterday. So it's really fresh on my mind, around the importance of finding community. And I think there's a certain, there's a romanticism to that. It's definitely something that probably most people will be like, yeah, super important. Yeah, community. But like, what are we willing to change, transition, shift, surrender, give up, right? Uh, in ourselves and in our own routines in order to make that be healthy and thriving in community. So I wanted to just, firstly, thank you for being that form of pillar for us, for our community, and just, you know, invite you to share what's on your heart in this moment about the importance of that and what you want others to think about when it comes to this dynamic, the rugged individual who can and will and must do it all alone, and the collective interconnected community that, that does maybe the differently difficult work of doing it together.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Michaela, so much. I really appreciate and I'm honored by those words. So thank you so much. What's really on my heart is that I want to encourage anyone out there who is a member of our spiritual work community or who is interested in joining, but maybe feels like they're not sure if they belong. You do belong. You do belong. And we're here to welcome you with open arms. I think so often when people are interested in joining a community, they feel like maybe they don't have anything to contribute. And so, for instance, someone may be thinking, "Oh, I'd love to join the Reiki Business Collective, but I don't have a Reiki business. I'm thinking about it. I'd love to start one, but what can I contribute?" But the truth is that we all have valid and valuable experiences and thoughts and opinions, and that maybe, sure, you haven't had a Reiki business for, all kinds of years, and maybe you don't know the quote unquote first thing about Reiki business, but you can bring your encouragement and your support, and you can bring your opinions. So even if you haven't had a Reiki business before, you can and do still probably have opinions on things like, gee, do you like this book cover or this book cover?
Totally.
And yeah, and those opinions are valid and valuable. I
Yeah.
think one of the things that we need to do, I mean, our greater culture and we as human beings, is to embrace all voices and opinions and recognize that they are all valid and valuable, even when they might differ from ours, and even when it might seem like the person with the opinion doesn't have as much experience, or maybe they feel like their opinion doesn't matter. But absolutely, your opinion does matter, your voice does matter, and we welcome you into the community with open arms.
I think the other, another piece that can feel so challenging about community relates to opinions, right? Because in community, we're going to run into opinions that are very different than ours, right? We might run into people's opinions that feel very offensive or that feel very, narrow, or that feel harmful or directed at us or directed at someone that we care about. And, community, it's like most of the hurts that we have experienced in our life originate in community, right? They originate in relationship in some way. And one of the things that, holding effective long-term community spaces requires, that I see you do so well, and can really be summarized as embodying the Reiki precepts, right? Is to hold spaces that are flexible enough to make room for lots of opinions, and firm enough to have boundaries around how those opinions are expressed and how the interactions happen inside of that space, so that harm is not caused or is minimized, and conflict can be navigated in ways that are productive rather than harmful. And that really, matters to someone who's maybe feeling on the fringe. Maybe they're super introverted, or they've been harmed, or they, aren't sure, maybe they've experienced being very different from the people around them. That was my experience, just always saying things that people are like, what? And to be able to step into a moderated space, so right now we're talking about Facebook groups, right? There's other ways in which you hold community in real time, but you're in Pennsylvania, I'm in California. I can't be in those spaces, at least haven't yet. But in this, moderated space of a Facebook group, I see you holding boundaries around being kind and compassionate to each other, around not being attached to our anger and our fear of each other, about being grateful to be together in the conversation, being true to ourselves, right? Being diligent inside of that, so that we can have more difficult conversations with each other. And that it can be, and that the community space can go deeper than just like transactional, like questions and answers, right? So I see that happening in the spaces that you hold. And for somebody to kind of lurk and kind of peek in and say, is this going to be a space where I'm going to be safe to be different, right? And then to see some like compassionate boundaries being held by the moderator is, I mean, it's been important to me. Like, that's what I do when I step into a new community space that I know that I might want to share vulnerably inside of, right? I'm going to check out how the moderators handle conflict and observe that, right, before I like put both feet in. Right? So I wanted to name that dynamic because, like ritual, sometimes the word community can be very loaded for folks. And, there might be a big eye roll and like, not that again. Like, I'm not stepping in there again. Right. That's not, people talk a good game, but, anytime you step into community, to groups, right, stuff goes wrong. So no, thank you. I'm going to stay over here by myself. So yeah, I recognize that dynamic in the groups that you moderate, in terms of holding safety through compassionate boundaries. And I appreciate that very much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. It's my honor. Thank you.
Yeah. And as we come to the end of our time today, there's so much, gosh, it's like I had all of these other things that I wanted to talk to you about. And then, the conversation just meanders the way it's supposed to. But we could definitely keep talking all day, but we are at the end of our time. But I'd love to just close by asking you to share just one thing that is bringing you joy these days. It can be a teeny tiny thing. It can be a big thing. It can be a moment. It can be something sustained. But just, what do you notice that is bringing you joy these days?
Yeah, thanks, Michaela, very much. Well, as we're recording this, we just passed Thanksgiving, and I do go to visit my parents. I don't live with them anymore, by the way. Have
Just for
not
the
for
record, okay?
live all alone in my own house. But getting to spend time with them, and just something as simple as playing Scrabble with my mom and having a cup of tea. That is just a wonderful thing. And so that brings me a lot of joy. Something else that's bringing me a lot of joy right now is the Build Your Reiki Business program, where it is just such an honor to have created and to offer that program to other Reiki practitioners who are building their Reiki business. And so that's bringing me a lot of joy, meeting with the program participants one-on-one, and just being able to offer that program. So that's bringing a lot of joy for sure. And then, my cats. So I took in 3 stray cats a year ago. It's been 1 year exactly. And that stray cat showed up on my doorstep. Well, she showed up before then, and I was feeding her. But it's been a year that she has showed up with her 2 kittens on my back door, and I ended up taking in all 3 of them. So I went from 0 cats to 3 cats in one day. And they, over the past year, have, there's been a lot of challenges, talk about change and transition, a lot of challenges, but they're just so cute and so much fun, and they make me laugh. And they're great comic relief and great companions. So they bring me a lot of joy as well. Thank you. What
Absolutely.
about you? Yeah, Michaela, what's bringing you joy
Yeah.
right
Well, first of all, 3 cats is much more of the correct number than 0 cats. Like,
now?
there's just there's my bias, right? I'm all in on the cats. And just to kind of put a exclamation point on the Build Your Reiki Business piece, I'm glad that that's bringing you so much joy, because you just birthed this program, and I see so much value in it. And you're filling a niche that I think our community needs, right? Because as a Reiki teacher who provides a comprehensive Reiki education to my students, that is a piece that I don't have to provide. The comprehensive education I provide is like in their relationship with the system of Reiki. It's not in how to build their Reiki business. And some of my students really want that. And so it was a relief to be like, cool, I have a place I can direct them. Something that is well designed, fully formed, with somebody whose skill set is in that realm, but also who is firmly rooted in the spirituality of Reiki. So I love that you created that piece. And I know enrollment is just about to close for this round, but it will reopen in the new year. And so for any of you listening who are, teasing with the idea of turning your passion for Reiki into a business, or perhaps you have already made that transition and could use some support, some help in community, we will put information for that program down below. It's a super valuable one. And part of what's bringing me joy is in those kinds of collaborations, right? And part of why I talk about community so much is that my natural inclination is isolation. Like, I'm very introverted. I'm very happy to sit alone in my garden and in my, like going out and even having a business where you have to just be like all the people all the time is like painful for me. Like, it's hard. I love it. It's like, it fills me up. It's always worth it. It's always an effort. My natural inclination is always to curl up and do it myself. So I'm speaking to myself when I'm critiquing the just do it yourself mindset. And so it's really a joy in those moments where collaboration and connection feel easy. And I've had a few of those lately, where it's like, oh, this feels easy. This doesn't feel like I have to push. And then on a more immediate level, I am a broken record. The garden is always bringing me so much joy. Built a totally new section in the community garden over the last few months, and it's now up and running and thriving, and feels very alive and very joyful. So I like fall gardening. It's much more relaxed than summer gardening. And I'm into it. I'm grateful to live in a place that has year-round gardening climate. So, not to brag, I know you're going to be under snow soon enough.
Yeah.
Amazing. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you, Christian, so much for jumping on this conversation, for being willing to just be wide ranging in how the conversation unfolds, and to share your perspectives with those who are listening. It's always, I think, so valuable to let these kinds of insights well up from, just from whatever's alive in the moment, to get us out of that kind of scripted space. And I really appreciate you rolling with that today, and for doing all of the work that you do in the world. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Michaela. And thanks so much to you as well, and all of the love and light that you bring too. So thank you.
Thank you. For those of you listening at home, we would love to hear your thoughts. What stood out to you from this conversation? Was there something that lit you up that struck a little chord in your mind or in your heart, is there a question that you might have for a person who's made their life into navigating questions, navigating change and transition? Please do share that down below. We'll make sure that Christian sees it. And of course, if you want to check out more about his work on any side of that spectrum, we didn't even talk about rune casting. We didn't talk about music. We didn't talk about your flute playing and your drumming. There's many facets to this work, and you can find out all about it at the links that we'll drop below. So friends, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. May you gather up what is of most heart and meaning for you so that as you go throughout your day, you're well provisioned for whatever it may bring. Until next time, we love you. Goodbye.